At the end of the day, none of this stuff is free, and you've got to figure out how you're going to afford what you need to execute on.
We want to build products that people want and want to use. So that's critical in shifting the mindsets and behaviors.
You're not just modernizing technology, but you're modernizing your entire business.
Prioritize our big things. Let's start from the top of the list and then keep prioritizing and working as we go.
This is a multi-year journey. Be prepared to learn along the way, get curious early, and plan for landmines. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Centric, your one-stop shop for understanding how tech and your business relate. I'm your host, Kris Moniz, and today I am joined by some lovely guests. First up, we have Shawn Wallace, a longtime enterprise architect and a former guest of the show. So welcome back, Shawn. We also have Darren Rehrer, a 30-year veteran of architecting solutions across process, people, and technology. And another returning guest, Kris Britton. She's an experienced change management practitioner, and she's focused on technology adoption. Welcome, everybody, and welcome back to some old friends. If you watched our prior episode, you probably are overall aligned on modernization and strategy and process redesign and system re-architecture. If you didn't, we'll have that linked in the description down below so you can go check it out. And if need be, you can pause this and come back after you've listened to that. In that episode, we do cover these concepts of modernization overall, building a strategy, building a business architecture, the concept of aligning and building that business architecture using process redesign where appropriate, and then taking an enterprise architecture and aligning it to all of those things so you can start thinking about, again, process with people, capabilities with the business architecture, and the technology and how it all wraps together. So today, we thought we'd start by talking about, okay, what's all that going to cost me? Because at the end of the day, none of this stuff is free, and you've got to figure out how you're going to afford what you need to execute on and how much modernization is enough for you. With that in mind, let's go to Darren. How do I think about the cost implications of such a complex strategy and a full-throated modernization of my business? Should I be going after a full-throated modernization of my business? Is there some magic bullet that I'm not aware of that can give me a budget end-to-end and I'm golden?
Thank you, Kris. It's a pretty complex question and doesn't come with a simple answer. But to your point, you've done the work. You've got a vision for your modernized business, right, around your process, your people, technology. And now you have to think about what is it going to take to do that. So obviously, it depends on the situation, what you're trying to do to modernize that business. In some cases, we've seen an easy answer to that. And I'm going to joke a little bit. There's a partner, someone that you can call upon that's got a basis for this built. And so you've got a very constructed way of thinking about that. In other cases, it's a very open-ended solution that exists. And you've got to estimate what is it going to take to change your process, skill up your people, shift mindsets and behaviors. You may even have to build a new technology that doesn't exist today. So you could be on the two whole ends of that spectrum that exist. Right, so the challenge, gets into, is there some easy way to estimate this journey that might take you 3 to 5 years and build that bottom up? So, a lot of times we like to think about it in terms of, again, you've architected the business around where you want to go. You need to build capabilities. Those will drive certain business capabilities around process, and you want to break down how much of those need to change. What's different about those, right? So that'll give you a basis of your features, your epics, things that you have to do. And you want to do those at a fairly high level quickly to give you a basis that can help you estimate the people and change work that exists. Because are you just tweaking what you do today, or are you really creating something new? Likewise, how does your technology stack across, whether that's a specific business application, your data behind all of that, how you integrate these solutions? Can you buy one tool that does it all, or do you have to string together multiple? Are you leveraging new technologies like AI, where you've got to build models and you're trying to create something that doesn't even exist, so you've got to allocate time in that learning cycle? So really you want to break that down from that and get to those features, those requirements to basically build up and say, here's what I need. Now, with all that said, you're going to learn from it. And so you can do in the past what we've always done, rough order of magnitude type of estimates, but you may have some high risk points within there. And so the way I tend to think about it is you've defined that business architecture, you've defined your patterns to delivering value, right? And so, or how you mature capabilities. You look to take those epic features, capabilities that you're building, how you mature those quarter by quarter, and you're trying to estimate those within those blocks. So two things that have helped us get better estimates would be identify the points of complexity or risk within that, and maybe do more, I would say, quick workshops or kind of rapid design cycles. And I think we might introduce some of this. We use some methodologies, like one we created for a client, IDEA, which is around ideate, design, evaluate, like kind of helps you build and think through that a little quicker, around defining those, I'll call it choke, risk, complexity points, get those more solid. Areas where you can leverage others and pull in known patterns. You can rapidly build and take learnings from others outside the organization, learning from your own organization to string those together. That helps us really maybe think through what does that overall cost take? Is the timeline right to do this? It may help where you can accelerate. It might make you be more cost effective.
That was a lot. There's a lot there. And I'm trying to distill it down into some bullets for the audience in terms of, okay, so I'm trying to get my arms around the cost. What are 3 things that I can do to make sure I'm making this a bit more bite-sized? I think I heard, number 1, try to break down the capabilities that you're trying to do into epics and features so you can start building them into chunks. And likely, once you've broken them down that way, do the first couple so you can start to get a feeling for your velocity, sort of a typical agile approach of don't go in thinking you're going to estimate the whole thing end to end. Get some experience underneath your belt, starting to implement and use that to start understanding how the rest of it is going to pan out and how your organization is going to experience it. So you're probably going to have a massive refinement to your budget after the first couple of epics go out there. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say. I just add, Kris, I'd also say make sure as we're doing that, we're aligning that to value. And I use that very broadly as a term because it could be building technology team value, or value in the backbone. It could be building value to the customer, or it could be doing something that you have a massive pain point either in your cost structures or your internal business value that may exist. So make sure you're not just doing them for the sake of doing them. Do them to come out with some goal to show the value to the organization holistically.
Okay, and so I use that as a starting point. In terms of the broader, I've got to start somewhere, right? I'm not going to get approval from the board to do any of this until I can give them a ballpark figure of, okay, so we understand all these capabilities you're going to bring to us, but before we let you spend penny one, we've got to know, are we going to pay $1 billion for all those capabilities or $100,000? Because those two numbers are wildly far apart. What would your guidance be to somebody who's trying to figure all this out, to gut check and say, this is a good place to start that estimation? And maybe it is as simple as, look, you don't want me to estimate that. You think you do, but you don't. You want me to estimate the first epic and then let me run against it and let you see the differential and then use that as a basis to estimate the next year or 2 years. Because let's face it, if it's a 5-year journey, by the time I get to year 4, some of the stuff that's still left on that roadmap may not be relevant anymore.
And Kris, I would even argue in today's modern shifting technology and the rate of change we have, even year 3 or even potentially a year and a half out, something's going to change from what you initially thought. So I do believe like every organization, their leadership wants to know a rough order of magnitude that exists. And you can look at and you can benchmark, through numerous sources of what a cost may be to do something and piece it together. Use that as your ROM. Identify what you're doing first. I would say what you're going to do first in the next, let's call it quarterly 1 or 2, 3 cycles. Get more granular in that. And that's where I was getting into the epics and features. Get it where you can estimate that a little bit more solid, because that's going to be more of the known, or you're going to want to spend time there on the known. I would also caveat out that if you have high points of risk or complexity, within it, identify there where maybe you do off to the side a proof of value or proof of concept, know what it's there. I was at one client where we were leveraging AI to do something fairly complex and new, and they needed certain things to come out of it. And so that was a big black box on what the cost would be. We looked at it as we put a placeholder in and said we will trigger doing a proof of concept, proof of value that could actually solidify how we were progressing, not to the scale of everything. And there were still going to be unknowns because we're not designing the whole solution, but we tried to pull apart a pattern within it across multiple and see what it would cost for us to do that pattern, leveraging that technology stack. And so then we could extrapolate that out. So if you've got areas that are big unknowns, you may approach it leveraging a process like that to actually get you a refined estimate, coming back quickly after your initial ask.
I guess the last thing I try to understand here is you talked a lot about there multiple times. You mentioned it comes down to people, process, technology. We've all heard that term for decades at this point. The piece that I always worry about is the people, right? I've been in technology for a long time, and I've seen technology change a lot in the last 30 years. And I've seen big enough shifts where people's capabilities get overrun by the technology that you need to leverage or you think you need to leverage. How do you think about those in terms of your budget? Like, how do you encourage people to think about the gap? That example you used about an AI project you were doing with a company. If that's their first ever AI project, I highly doubt they have the skills in-house to not just do that project, but to maintain it. How are you thinking about the longer term cost implications and estimations around that for your client? How do you get them to start thinking about those types of impacts?
Kris, that's a good question, and thank you for asking that. I look at it as you can break this down a couple pieces. I think of it, there's the skills component of it, right, that exists, but there's also the mindsets and behaviors which can permeate across the whole organization, right? So to me, the one question in estimating it is if we take the AI example, do I have the skills to do this? Meaning the technical skills of someone who knows the various tools, the people who know how to construct it, what are the implications to the data side? So do I have the people who have the skills to make that a reality, right? So you may have to skill up, you may have to hire, or you may look at it as I can rapidly get those through a partnering type of aspect or outsourcing aspect to gain a certain skill set into what's there. That's your choice on the strategy or approach you choose to take. And so that one can be solved that way, thinking through scale, speed at which you need to move, so meaning how many people you need to do it. To me, the one that's tougher is when you start to think about the skills that are needed across, I'm going to jokingly say, the masses of your company, or the mindsets and behaviors needed across the mass. To me, that's actually the harder one that has bigger risk in adoption and being successful. And I've actually seen companies, I'm going to call it slam dunk. Not that it's easy, but they slam dunk the design, the process, the technology. People get it all stitched together. It's ready to go. They roll it out there, and the mindsets and behaviors haven't changed, right? And so, like we all know this one. I'm going to say this one as a joking one because it's not AI. But if you think about as companies went on journeys in the past to a CRM solution, right? We put this out there. We have workflows. We have ways of capturing the data. If the sales force doesn't change their behavior of, I've got my planner and my notebook and I do everything through word of mouth and none of that information gets in there, we just spent a ton of money and built awesome workflows and processes. Basically, we found ways to aggregate the data, report it out, but we didn't get the value out of what we were doing, right? That would exist. Or imagine we built the best portal on the front end, but we never really understood the customer need in that architecture, and they're not using that portal. So we have to do things with it. It's not just adoption inside of our own realm. How are we promoting, if it's external or to our suppliers, how we get them to use something that we build that's awesome. So to me, it's how do we build something, or construct, not just like a car or the iPhone that we all have that people want. We want to build, I'll call it products, as technology solutions, internal or external user. We want to build products that people want and want to use, right? So that's critical in shifting the mindsets and behaviors. So that has to be thought of, and that helps adoption. Because I would say, whether we estimate this at 2 years or 3 years and what that cost is, the bigger cost is if we build something as a solution that no one uses or we only get half value, that's actually the biggest cost.
So, I don't know, Kris, I think Darren just kind of set you up to kind of nail it home, but I mean, fair question, right? So I think what I just heard there was don't worry as much early on about what the cost implications are of the skill gap. Worry more about the cost implications of not contemplating it all, because that is
Exactly.
infinitely more expensive.
Exactly. You need to look at it holistically. And so you're not just modernizing technology, but you're modernizing your entire business, to Darren's point earlier, your operations, your people. And technology modernization cascades a whole lot of change through an organization. It changes employee roles, it changes processes, policies, business models, a lot. And so you really need to invest in the time to understand what is the impact to the business and what is the impact to employees. Because you need to prepare employees for those major changes. And by preparing them for those major changes and preparing them so that they know what to expect on day one, so that they know what to do on day one, that leads to adoption. So, we have I think we all have these scenarios in the past where we have implemented technology and maybe given like a little bit of navigation training, but we didn't help employees understand how their day-to-day activities were going to change. And so we left them to their own devices on day one to figure out, oh, what's changing? And so day one, they're running around like chickens with their heads cut off, trying to figure out, oh, how do we use technology in context to our business operations? And so when we look at then the cost of that, going back to Darren's point, you really need to look at it holistically, because you don't want to implement technology and not invest in the people part. Because if you implement and then it blows up and doesn't work very well after implementation, and the business is not getting the value that it was expecting, then you end up paying a lot more in the long run to go back and do it right.
I might argue at design time, when you're designing the solution, and we've taken this as a practice, in the work that I do, is that when we're before we come up with an architecture, before we come up with that design, we have to understand who are stakeholders and what that is. It's not just the business stakeholders. It's not just the business processes. You have partners, vendors on the edge, but you also have engineers that are going to implement. You have operations people that are going to run it, and you're going to have platform partners that you have to integrate, and they all get a say in what they need out of this architecture. And if we do that up front, we're going to have better outcomes, because we created requirements based on not on a wider audience of stakeholders.
That's a really good point, Shawn, because one of the things that I've seen in previous projects is we may come in early and really start on that change plan, and we're so focused on end users who are going to use the technology and making sure that they know how to use it. Sometimes the IT staff kind of gets ignored or missed. And, especially when you're talking about moving from a legacy system that an organization has been using forever, and they're moving to modernization, if you don't put the same type of focus and engagement on the IT staff and bring them along and upskill them, you're going to have IT staff that are scared. They don't want to hang around anymore because all they know are legacy systems. Maybe they want to hang around because they want to learn new things, but we're not upskilling them in the same way that we're upskilling end users. And so to your point, it's so important in the very beginning to understand who are all of the stakeholders: customers, vendors, regulatory agencies, IT staff, end users. You really need to look at that holistically and then figure out what is that gap, right, between current state and future state. And it's so important for organizations to even just, continue that upskilling, especially with the IT staff, so that they don't have to make such a huge jump or leap from like a legacy system to a brand new modernization system.
As I'm hearing the two of you talk through this, something comes to mind that I wasn't thinking about talking about in this episode, but I think it's very relevant. Kris, do you ever do sort of a risk assessment when you're doing at the beginning of a people and change project, where it's, okay, I need to first understand all the impacted parties in your organization by this change, understand the level and degree to which they will be impacted, and more importantly, what the risks of loss are to you as a firm if they don't take this change well. And the reason that came to mind is, you guys were talking about legacy systems and losing sight of the IT people that are doing that work. And you see this a lot in companies that have stayed on legacy systems for decades. Literally, some of those people have become the only stewards of knowledge of the underpinnings of how your business actually runs, because the people who designed it have long since left on the business side. And the only people left standing are 30-year veterans on the IT side who built it, and they know what they built. They know why they were told what they were told the reason was for why they built what they built, but they're the only ones that do. Everybody else just sort of takes it for granted that it works and what it tells us is the truth. So is that kind of a must do when you're talking a big modernization like this, is kind of doing a mapping like that? And what would that look like?
It's absolutely very critical. And we do that most of the time. So when we think about any kind of technology transformation or technology modernization, from a technical standpoint, there's always that discover design phase, right? That discover phase in the very, very beginning, when a tech team is going in and really understanding the systems and the integrations and, what are those things that they need to know about before they can even start designing a new solution. The same thing applies for the people and operational part. OCM practitioners come in ideally at the same time that the tech modernization team comes in, and we do conduct assessments of the business organization, and we take a look at a lot of different categories. We take a look at leadership alignment. What are the skills going on, and what are the skills in the different business functions and IT functions? What kind of change has taken place in the past, whether recent or not recent, and how did those changes occur? How well were they adopted? Were they not adopted? What were the pain points? What are the things that we need to think about in terms of employee readiness? What is the culture of a company? A lot of times you find companies that have a culture that hasn't had a lot of change, and they are hearing hints. There's already frustration and fear, going on in the organization. We look at processes. We understand what's going on from an end-to-end perspective. Darren kind of hit on this a little bit earlier. And so it's really, really important to get an understanding of the business so that we can then take that information from an assessment and take it to leadership and say, here are the things where you have strength in, and here are the things that are risks to your organization being ready and capable for this kind of change. And these are the things we probably really need to put more focus on. And sometimes it even starts off with leadership alignment. A lot of times we'll come in and we'll assess by having interviews with different leaders of an organization. And a lot of times we find that leaders of an organization need to be aligned because they all have different thoughts around what is the objective, what does success look like. And if you don't have that leadership alignment in the very beginning, it can be a very challenging project.
I can see
Building
that.
on that,
Yes,
Kris.
we need to modernize. Well, hold up. Everybody define what you mean by modernize.
Exactly.
Kris, I was going to add to that, like as Kris was describing everything with like alignment and all of that going through. One of the things that I've actually seen very successful is almost right from the beginning, as you're getting your steering team, the leaders who are part of this, and you're building that alignment, you're also setting them up all the way at the beginning for starting to think about the end game, which is adoption readiness, right? And their ability to execute. So you might want to start to think about it as all the way at the beginning, introducing an adoption readiness checklist. Like I've done this, and they've ranged anywhere from like 15 to 20 attributes. And you let those leaders know when it gets down to the end and we're ready to flip the switch quarterly or on the various increments, they own the readiness for certain aspects. And they're almost thinking through, either based on functional areas of their business, the people that report up to them, how value streams work together. So you might assign one to the value streams, depending on how you did your business architecture up front. But you start to think about an owner of that. And then you think about if you're using a change network or other things, the change networks and others feed up into them. And those leaders take accountability and look at each other around the table. and say, are you ready? Are you ready? And they're holding each other accountable to all the dimensions of aspects of readiness around business continuity or training associated with it or mindsets or are our metrics right? Are we doing all these things to truly do this right so that they know we spent all this time and effort on this journey and we're going to hold each other accountable for every incremental phased rollout that we have on this journey. All right. And so it's a different way of thinking for some organizations. Some it's in their DNA. And when they do that, that just makes all the cost investment energy put in design, the process, the technology, the org structure, getting it ready to roll out, it allows that to be adopted.
Absolutely.
So much easier.
Yeah, that adoption, I think that when we use the word change management or even adoption, that's a mystery to people. It's like how do you change mind shifts? How do you achieve adoption? And what does that entail? And it's very big and it's very complex. But if you think about it, what I try to do is talk to people about how does it impact your business and your employees. And if we understand what that impact is, then we can help get them ready. We can help set that expectation. Like, for instance, if I'm an employee and I'm front facing with customers every day, my technology is all changing. My world is about ready to turn upside down. So I'm very nervous because, you know what, I don't want mad customers at me on day one because it's taking me a half an hour to answer their questions or, to get them what they need. I want to be able to find what I need at my fingertips day one. So if I am being considered as part of the overall plan as an employee, and then I'm being brought along the journey and I'm being told your day is going to look different in these ways, and I'm receiving training not just on how to use the technology from a navigation standpoint, but how do I enter a sales order? How do I enter a purchase order? How do I look up customer information? How do I make sure that we've got enough inventory on hand? If I know how to do those very important critical things that, it's going to take for me to take care of a customer, that brings me along in the journey, prepares me, then I'm more apt to be more comfortable, be more open, and more apt to follow new ways of working on day one. If I'm not the one that's having to figure that out on day one, it's already being trained to me.
So, Shawn, I'm going to ask you to hop in here because I think a lot of what I'm hearing here, and especially what Kris just mentioned, kind of comes down to how complex is that solution going to be that you're putting together and how far away from the comfort zone of the user it's targeted at and the builder who has to create it. And what is that going to do to the organization? Like, how do we, sooner or later, you got to make decisions about what tooling we're going to use, how complicated we're going to make these systems, how much functionality we're going to add, et cetera. How do you make calls like that? And how much does, partnership with a OCM specialist kind of feed into decisions on that front when doing software selections and those sorts of things?
Well, one thing I learned the hard way, and I know when in 2011.
Oh, wow.
That if you do organizational change management wrong in software, you make your life way harder than it needs to be, right? An example is that we're gonna make our software development process more efficient by adopting Agile. We're going to do a lot of test automation, so we're going to need developers to write tests against our code. The problem was there were already 20 testers there that weren't coders, so the first thing we hear is, what, are we all getting fired? And that was not the case. The case was we were hoping to adapt to analyst roles or to test automation roles, but we did not do that well. So organizational change management is on the checklist of things we always look into now, right? And so that's super important. So it's very important to get that right. The thing that I will add is, Darren pointed at, Kris, you brought it up. Let's prioritize our big things. Let's start from the top of the list and then keep prioritizing and working as we go. The mantra should be no big anything, no big bangs. It's not always avoidable, but if our change is incremental, I think it's easier to deal with and easier to adjust to. And when it comes to design, so we've got a plan, a general approach. We're going to, almost all business modernizations end up on the technical side. You don't have technical discussions or business discussions without talking about each other. So it's important that we partner from the beginning, that the business designers, the business process people, or speaking to the architects, and because what we're trying to do is we're trying to identify patterns. Darren was talking about patterns before. It's a shortcut for design patterns. It's ways of solving problems. What happens in these systems is that we have lots of partners, we have lots of integrations, we have lots of packages, and what happens is that as part of the process, we do the same thing over and over again. We solve the same 4 or 5 problems over and over again. So what we want to do is we want to identify the patterns in which we integrate or solve those problems, so that it's not a new thing every time. And if we think in terms of patterns, then we don't have to think in terms of particular technologies. If we have a design pattern or an integration methodology in place with modernization, then we can look at the marketplace and say which tools exist to implement these patterns. Then what we've done is we've really reduced our tool selection to a business decision, not purely a technical decision. We bend the tool to our patterns, not so how often do we implement our patterns according to the technology? Well, we're doing it the opposite. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to use broader skills, right? We're not locked into a particular technology stack. We're locked into implementing certain patterns and certain ways of doing things. And those are easily adaptable by most technologists. So that means we get to reuse the skills that they already have. We might have to apply them in a new technology stack, but they're the same patterns that they're used to, or certainly patterns that they can adapt to pretty quickly. And then when we pick a technology, we pick technology stacks that will implement the patterns that we want, but the ones that give us the best deal or the best business deal that we have, or the best hosting topology that we like, or they're an existing partner.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, you're thinking a lot less about, hey, the whole team that builds our custom apps, they've worked in C for the last 15 years, and now you want them to work in Java or whatever the case may be, or modern development stuff for obviously .NET's kind of had its time in the sun, and now it's trying to remember what some of the modern stacks are, but regardless.
Say Python. Everybody loves Python these days, right?
Only data people like Python.
You'd be surprised.
You get the idea, right? It's less about, one coding language and it's going to be a huge challenge to learn another. And it's more about, no, if you know one coding language, it's not a huge hill to climb to learn another, as long as the patterns of development are recognizable to you. You've seen this before. The patterns of design are similar to you. You've been using these for a while. So we're limiting the change as much as we can to the places where we have no choice.
But that's when we talk about modernization and integration, we're really talking about how our technology talks to each other. So you'll hear a lot about composed solutions. So we put in an infrastructure architecture that allows us to build composed solutions. That means using the best CRM and the best document management system and the best ERP, and maybe build a custom portal or two, but create a custom payment gateway or a custom notification engine, and we can have all of these pieces talk together. They're composed, some packaged, some hosted, some custom, some software as a service built on our infrastructure. So we've decomposed these systems. So now we just have to we build the systems how they need to be built, but we govern how they talk to each other, and those are where the patterns are. So lots of times in the modern world, I don't know how practical that is. I love the idea, but I don't really know how practical the idea of letting teams pick the technology stack for their particular tool. So I do like skills to be a little more portable. I want to jump on your system if I need to and be able to troubleshoot it. But we have that option here. So what we will govern, with the architect, what we're picking that core infrastructure, maybe the packages that we want to solve certain tasks, but we also impose, we need operational and telemetry data out of this process. So you build your system how you want to build it. You have to talk to other systems in a certain way, but you also have to tell us your health and your status and your logging in a certain way so that we can build operational dashboards. But what we've done is that because those are things we've been doing that we're used to doing, we might be integrating an AI agent, right? Which that's particular technology, but when it wants to talk to the rest of the infrastructure, it's going to use these patterns that we define.
So what I think I'm hearing there is, if I'm considering a large scale modernization, one of the things I need to think about early is how clearly defined are my patterns, my integration patterns today? Because by the time I get to this point in my journey where I have to start selecting new technology stacks and everything else, if I don't know what those patterns are today, I don't have a basis from which to design the future without potentially creating a massive amount of change, because I'm just not clear on how these things interact today.
Yeah, I always like to say that you need somebody on your team that just thinks about those problems. We usually put the hat of kind of enterprise solution architect on them, or enterprise architect, but we want somebody that's not really super attached, at least at this time, to any particular process or implementation or product that we're working on, but just thinks about how we implement processes across the enterprise. Because what a modernization is, remember we talked before, it's largely a decoupling exercise. We're taking our giant pieces of software and making them smaller pieces of software and implementing processes across them. And that's how we get away from the no big bangs and incremental delivery. So we need to think about how these particular systems, these subsystems, need to talk to each other. If you remember, we've gone through this process a couple of times and we've solved it in different ways. And for the most part, the patterns were solid. Think service-oriented architectures back in the day. There's nothing wrong with service-oriented architectures. We didn't govern them. We didn't put any restrictions or guide rails, and we didn't think about them in terms of patterns. We just implemented them ad hoc, and we found ourselves in trouble. We're going to find ourselves in the same kind of trouble in these new modern distributed architectures that are multi-data center if we don't think about the process and the way that we govern how they interact and what the data looks like as it's crossing the wire and the way we monitor and track processes.
And Kris, I'll bring this full circle back to the first question you asked me too around cost and estimation. If you have your patterns and everything defined already, right, or let's say have 80% of them defined and you're looking at modernizing certain aspects of it, your ability to estimate that is going to be a lot easier. You're going to be more accurate to what you do. If you're at a clean slate where you've done none of that and you've got, I'm going to call it all legacy apps with no backbone around the modern architecture, your ability to estimate is going to actually come back to trying to maybe do some architecture work and sessions around what do we believe our pattern is to be, how many are there, what do we have to do, and that's going to be some of the foundation for that estimate and cost.
Got it. So I think if I were to try to tie a bow on what we talked about here today, bite-sized, don't swallow the elephant all at once. And that goes double for how you're thinking of estimating, but it's also about how you're thinking about the impact on your organization as a whole, how you're thinking about your architectural decision-making processes. At the end of the day, go bit by bit, and an ounce of planning is worth a pound of cure. And I know that's a pretty lame, old school way of thinking of things, but I think it applies here, right? Where you're coming down to say, look, there's a lot you probably aren't thinking of in the idea of go fast, break stuff when it comes to modernizing a large scale enterprise business. It's a really bad idea because you can break way more than you're thinking. So try to be purposeful about how you estimate up front and kind of bucketing early days what you want to do first. Before you touch a line of code, make sure you understand who's impacted and to what degree and what risk you're about to undertake for disruption in your business. And then understand the patterns of the technology that's about to be impacted by this. Make sure you know what they are. And if you don't, go figure it out before you do anything. And then you're ready to move on to the next step, which is implementation. But you got to do all of those things first. Is that fair?
Yeah, don't
Very.
make all decisions up front when you know the least about your problem set.
Excellent. And I think that brings it back to how you started on this thing, Darren, right? This is a multi-year journey. Be prepared to learn along the way. And as you make decisions cautiously with a mind towards, I'm going to learn a lot here. So let me be prepared to do so. Get curious early and plan for landmines.
Kris, I was just speaking at with a conference with a group earlier this week, and we were talking about journeys as a company goes on this journey. The word I use there is pathways, right? You're going to go down pathways or solution pathways, and a pathway will have forks and deviants to it. So realize you're going to try to construct something and estimate the time it's going to take you to do that, the effort it's going to do it, but you're going to take different forks that may have a bumpier road or a hill, and you've got to be prepared that you're going to have these splits as you learn across this journey, because you can't practically lay out a 3 to 5 year journey at times and know everything that's going to happen.
Well, excellent. I thank you very much, all of you, for spending some time with us today. And hopefully the audience learned a little bit as they heard you all talk through the processes and the different adventures that you've had in your careers around this stuff. If you want to keep the conversation going or suggest an idea for a future episode, please comment below. And as always, if you have a question for me or one of our guests, you can contact us directly via the contact information in the description below. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you in the next one.